You're listening to a CNA podcast.
When you buy a new phone or a new kitchen appliance, or maybe you're doing online shopping, are you thinking about the resources and energy that went into producing them and the packages that they came in? Do you consider how these new purchases are transported to you or how they will be disposed of later? All of it adds up. And increasingly, companies are getting out their calculators to work all of this out. Today, we're making footprints of the carbon variety. Hello, I'm Jack Board. This is Climate Conversations, and I'm with Liling Tan. Hi, Liling. You've got a bottled drink there with you. Are you feeling guilty about its carbon footprint?
Hi, Jack. I see where you're going with this. And yes, I do feel some measure of guilt. The bottle alone is made of plastic, polyethylene terephthalate, PET. It's processed from crude oil, so there's that carbon footprint. The drink also required energy to produce, and the bottled beverage probably came in some sort of bulk packaging, transported from some factory far away by vehicles that run on petrol or diesel, fossil fuels. Then after I'm done with this drink, it probably will go into hopefully it will go into the recycling bin, and then hopefully it will indeed be recycled, but that will also require energy, which emits greenhouse gases as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is carbon accounting in a nutshell.
Okay, carbon accounting. Wow. Please stay with us. Even though that does sound really complex, it is important. And really, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3 when it comes to a term called scope emissions. And more of that later on. We will explain the differences, and we'll look at how companies and countries can count and cut the emissions in their operations and what it means for you and I buying stuff. First up, Liling, it's quiz time. You're going to jump in the hot seat again. No lifelines. Try and answer my question of the week. Now, I know
they're getting more difficult.
They are. I know you've been doing lots of study, though, about emissions this week, so you've had a chance to really test your knowledge. So this one's going to be another ranking challenge. Are you ready?
Okay, hit me.
Which of these regular activities that you might be doing on a weekly basis has the biggest carbon footprint? Okay, you've got 4 options. Number 1, using your phone for 5 hours a day for a week. I don't know if you use it for more than 5 hours, but let's just go with 5 hours. Number 2 is driving your car for 20 minutes to work 5 days a week. Number 3, a 10-minute hot shower every day for a week. Or maybe buying a beautiful bunch of flowers, but flowers that have been imported from overseas.
Oh, you want me to guess now? Or did you want it to percolate first?
No, you've got a few minutes to think of that, and we'll get to the answers at the end. Okay, news time. Let's set the scene with some headlines in the climate space, Liling. First, the fallout from that really scary incident involving Singapore Airlines.
Yeah, that's right. It's still top of mind for many of us in Singapore. The Singapore Airlines flight that suffered extreme turbulence en route from London to Singapore on the 20th of May. Now, the turbulence caused a steep jump within seconds, resulting in multiple casualties among passengers and cabin crew. Now, the incident has cast a spotlight on the impact climate change is having on air travel. Researchers are already saying that it's making turbulence more frequent and severe. And so, Jack, it looks like we might have to brace for bumpier skies ahead.
Don't like the sound of that. It's
No.
definitely bad news for nervous flyers, the way that climate change is, it's really contributing to turbulence, which means as the planet gets warmer, skies are getting rockier. And that's basically, it's caused by changes in wind speed due to warmer air. And we know that warmer air is increasing because of carbon emissions. And because all these jet streams, though, are invisible, they're really hard to forecast or avoid.
And it's not just nervous travelers as well. I think, it's even causing frequent travelers like myself some pause, thinking twice about whether I need to take a flight.
Definitely not nice when you get caught in something like that.
Yeah. Now, the other development, it's happening in your neck of the woods. Could Thailand be the next country to relocate its capital due to rising sea levels. Now, following in the footsteps of Indonesia, perhaps, according to one official in Bangkok, the move is being considered due to the city's risk of inundation and flooding during the wet season.
We know that Bangkok is sinking. It's only between 0.5 metre and 2 metres above sea level. And the whole metro area is really sitting precariously on what used to be marshland. It was actually a terrible idea to build such a large capital city in this location. There's also soft clay that's really highly compressible under the surface. So you have this natural land subsidence and as well decades of extracting groundwater, pumping up water that the city requires. On top of that, all this rapid development had put more pressure on the foundations of the city. Then you think about all the tall buildings, all the cars and vehicles, the roads, the rail systems, all contributing to this problem. So whether Bangkok moves in the future, it's an interesting one to ponder.
Yeah, and it likely won't be the last major city facing possible relocation in this part of the world. Reports also point to Ho Chi Minh City. It's also at risk of sinking. Elsewhere, there is Amsterdam, Venice, and Cairo as well, facing the threat from rising sea levels. So it's a reality, I think, that it's difficult to avoid at this point for a lot of these cities.
I'm sure they'll be defending right to the last moment, but yeah, something to watch as we go forward. All right, it's time now for our main story this week. Counting emissions is a serious business. It forms the basis of predictions about the future of the planet. Countries are shaping their economies around precisely how many emissions are being generated. And businesses are being increasingly made to report the emissions in their operations as well.
But greenhouse gas emissions are not created equal, and neither are the companies that emit them. Now, let's walk through the differences between Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. They're all important, and they're different, and not quite really as easy as 1, 2, 3, as Jack believes.
Sorry, I lied before. They're not simple, but we'll get through it.
And so we'll try and break it down for you. So when a company has to report Scope 1 emissions, it is the direct emissions from the company's business activities, what it alone emits when it burns fuel for heating or in the combustion of gas or petrol in cars. Now, power companies, for example, burn fossil fuels to generate electricity. That's Scope 1. A car service with a fleet of vehicles that run on petrol is another example. Scope 1 can also include activities from manufacturing products like the use of heating kilns to make cement that directly releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, Scope 2 are indirect emissions that are acquired by the company, like when they buy electricity from a utility or power company to power their buildings and operations. Now, electric vehicles fall in this category because the electricity that charges the car batteries are purchased. They're not burning the fuel themselves, so the emissions are Scope 2.
Right. So most of the largest companies in the world now already account and report on these Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions from their direct operations. But that then brings us to Scope 3, which I think is actually really interesting, but wow, so problematic to work out and to reduce.
It's a doozy.
Yeah, Scope 3 is basically everything else, upstream and downstream. So these are indirect emissions from a company's operations, such as the production of goods and services that a firm acquires from its vendors, which might be transporting and storing their goods. It could be emissions from the production of the energy that the company consumes. And even emissions from a company's investments count under Scope 3. And then further downstream, Scope 3 also includes emissions from how a product is used. Let's say it's an air conditioning unit or a computer, and then how it's disposed if those items were incinerated or recycled or end up in landfills. All of that counts towards a company's emissions.
Scope 3 emissions, that is, and Scope 3 reporting is vast and the most challenging to account for at this moment. It is also still mainly optional, but because it can determine which vendor or supplier a company chooses to work with, there's growing pressure to track and monitor them. Did you know, Jack, that Scope 3 emissions can account for more than 85% of a company's greenhouse gas emissions? That's a lot.
Yeah, that's so high. It's really crazy to think about. But when you actually look at the details of what Scope 3 involves, it's so encompassing the life products of everything a company produces, and all of the people or other companies that it works with. So you can understand why it's important to know, but finding that information out.
Yeah, it's
just
really
seems
complex.
Really complicated. And then if we talk about us as consumers, how we could possibly understand these Scope 3 emissions when we're thinking about our purchases,
Yeah.
that's going to be difficult as well, unless all of this eventually becomes normal and transparent.
Yeah, and Scope 3 just basically means you need to think about other companies, what happens before you actually start making your product and what happens afterwards. So it's just all encompassing. And I think it's very daunting for a lot of companies, especially small and medium-sized companies. We know in Singapore that this carbon accounting is going to be required soon. From next year, all listed companies here will have to start reporting on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Then Scope 3 will have to come in the following year. What this means for SMEs, though, that's the question, especially when it comes to securing corporate and government contracts that are increasingly taking into account the project's carbon footprints. And in this climate conversation brought to you by Schneider Electric, I speak with Yoon Young Kim, Cluster President for Singapore and Brunei. Net zero. You might have heard this term so many times over and over again that it can be quite annoying now. There are also words like decarbonisation and also sustainability that can almost be just as grating. But for businesses, these are more than words. They're about survival and growth. But what does getting to net zero mean for a small or medium-sized business? Where and how do they start? For the answers, I've got with me Yoon Young Kim of Schneider Electric. He is their cluster president for Singapore and Brunei. Welcome, Yoon Kim.
Good morning.
Schneider Electric is working to digitally transform the energy management and automation space. What does that mean?
Spot on, Lily, actually. Yeah, we are in the energy management and automation. In fact, energy management all relates to whatever it comes from generating energy, distributing energy, transmitting energy as well, and up to the level of end user. So it can be a building, can be infrastructure, can be homes, where we bring solutions together and we interact with them, understanding the pain points, first of all, and trying to bring the right solution, right technology in place to help to be energy efficient and consequently decarbonizing and making the world more sustainable.
So why has it been so difficult for SMEs to adopt greener practices and to green their operations? What is holding them back? Is it just a lack of information? Is it the high cost?
Yeah, I think those two and plus more few things, right? It's not like switch on, switch off, right? It is tomorrow I want to have a more sustainable operation. It's not like just switch on and put money and you are able to make this happen. It is a journey. It's a journey as an organization. It's a journey as households. It's a journey as a country. It's a journey as the government, right? And in fact, when we look into the SMEs, the difficult part is, first of all, acquaintance. That's number one. And then, of course, when it comes to what needs to be done, it has some investments as well in technology. And then, is this payback, ROI is there or not? That's a question that comes all the time in the SMEs because that's the most sensible part of their body, right? Is the pocket, is the money. And they want to make sure that anything invested has a return and makes sense for their business. And of course, the qualification of people in this subject is still, we are in progress. We are learning. We have a lot of people getting more acquainted of this theme and this content and understanding how we can decarbonize in a more intelligent way. And of course, usually SMEs are what we call scope 3. They are supplier, vendor for the main big companies or even other medium-sized companies. And the question is, what are the qualifications? What are the compliance methods? What are the requirements from those companies? And that makes sure that I am competitive, but that I don't overdo it, right? Sometimes some companies are overdoing it and you are not competitive. That's the position that you don't want to be in.
Can you give me an example of SMEs that you work with here?
What I see most at this stage are heavy industry as well as very intense use of energy industry, what we call electro-intensive energy industries. So, for instance, we have been experiencing companies in semiconductor segment as well as life science segments. And those are the ones that recently, together with us, we are joining efforts to make sure that we can help their vendors, their supply chain to decarbonize. And in fact, if you take maybe top 10 in the industry, they're going to see that their vendors are 85-90% are the same ones. Right, because all of them are supplying for different brands, and of course, not only one exclusive brand itself. So when you look into the value chain, instead of every company doing effort themselves, they can help as a platform, as a segment, to help the SMEs and the vendors, scope 3, what we call, to decarbonize faster in a more efficient and collaborative way.
What about industries that are particularly difficult to decarbonize?
So there are, of course, the heavy industries, which is much more difficult. Maybe I will start with the easy ones.
Okay, let's
Because the easy one, you can see buildings, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Where today, even in Singapore, BCA have a clear standards. BCA, Building and Construction Authority, where basically has green mark standards and very clear specification and the standards that you need to achieve to get to the gold level, platinum level, or super low energy, or zero energy, or positive energy. Those are the grades that we have. And we see more people engaged in the building to decarbonize and understanding where are the major areas in their priorities they can really be successful and getting more energy efficient. So, of course, it can be in the HVAC, what we call is the air conditioning, cooling system, or it can be in lighting, and so on and so on. So, these are the areas that we see clear grasp of where are the priorities that we want to really address, and where are the areas that, okay, as a second stage, you can address in terms of energy efficiency. Similarly, we see in data center. Recently, in Singapore, we talk about data centers, moratorium, and it is related to PUE. PUE is the power utilization. And in fact, when you talk about PUE, today data center needs to be below 1.3 by the requirement of IMDA. And that's what we already bring the right solutions, and we see data centers now already projecting and designing and building for data center PUE even below 1.3, even below 1.2. So these are the ones that we can see as example of has been easier, is structured, and approach has been very seriously done. When it comes to the infrastructure, when it comes to the heavy industry, we can go to the energy generation, refinery, we can go to semicon areas, and we can go to the infrastructure side. Is much more difficult. And in fact, even the regulation is not there totally, similar to as I put as a BCA, where we need to have a certain level of parameters to achieve certain standards or certain level of energy efficiency. So those are the ones that I feel will take a little bit more time. But as I said, it's a journey. We have to start as early as possible.
Now, when you work with an SME, what is the easiest part of a company to decarbonize?
Take an example of a building, as we have many in Singapore. And one of the things that we are always calling off is about cooling, is the HVAC system. I think you have been facing as well. I face myself. Sometimes I go in some events and it's very cold. I know one of the restaurants I go, I don't like the place because it's cold. It's too cold.
Here in Singapore, right? Everything is so cold inside.
Yeah. And you know what happens? I have been raising this point a lot, but ultimately is because the system is a central system.
Right.
So they cannot regulate a specific point in that restaurant, in that building. And that's a waste of energy. That's a
is.
waste of, the whole resources. And we are not contributing in decarbonizing the world. And in fact, if you have a more intelligent system of cooling, or sometimes whenever you have a cooling system which is more centralized, but you can regulate in different areas, this helps a lot. And most of the easiest part, and is the one that really consumes a lot of energy today in buildings. So that is one of the examples that I can mention, which is an easy one and is a low-hanging fruit, in fact.
Air conditioning, low-hanging fruit for decarbonization.
That's right.
Okay. What about the toughest part to decarbonize?
Whatever we measure, we can really achieve, or whatever we don't measure, we can never achieve.
Right.
And whenever you talk about energy, you are able to measure easily. But when it comes to the embodied carbon in construction materials, that can be a wood, can be a cement, it can be a steel, it can be many other elements in a construction. Whenever it's embodied carbon, it's very difficult today to really decarbonize and make sure that we have the right metrics and make sure that we have the right resources in place to make it more sustainable building. So it's an exercise. Of course, there are a lot of efforts, and I see a lot of people having already new buildings with very sustainable materials and very sustainable resources. But it's still, we have many of the buildings which is brownfield, the buildings that exist already installed base that we cannot change overnight. And those are the ones that is quite difficult and will take time, and we need a lot of effort in the industry, in the ecosystem, to help to replace or improve or enhance those materials.
Okay. Now, cost is, of course, a huge issue for a lot of these companies. The argument, though, is that, sure, reducing emissions is going to be expensive, but there's also the acknowledgement that it could cost us a lot more in the long run if we don't. And we're already seeing companies losing business because of issues around compliance and requirements. So how can MNCs help smaller companies go green or take them along in their journey to create greener supply chains?
We have been doing a few surveys for SMEs, and we have what we call Singapore Green Supply Chain Survey 2024, where we found out that most of the leaders, they are engaged in this journey. And the question is more about how and when and what to do. Right. Because in fact, any of these journeys without the engagement of the leaders is very difficult to embark and very difficult to be successful. And we can see more and more the large companies, they are requiring supply chain, their vendors to be more sustainable. With that, of course, the SMEs that supply to the big companies are the ones that they are looking in solutions, solutions to be more sustainable, more decarbonized solutions, but in the same time be a cost-effective and competitive. Of course, in the survey as well, they are saying that 62% of the business are lost due to the compliance, but actually 78% are from the small companies. And in small companies, whenever they are not compliant on those requirements, they will not be able to be qualified. And I've been myself participating in a lot of biddings and tenderings that already 5 even to 10% of the criteria is related to sustainability and decarbonization qualifications.
I do have one other question before I let you go. You work for a French company in the electricity management space, covering Singapore and Brunei. You've led teams across nearly all of the continents. You're from South Korea, but you grew up in Brazil, and you speak more languages than there are people in this room. So, given this global perspective, where do you see this region's market potential for decarbonization?
Very good question. Is huge. We are talking about COP28, where the commitment was global and many, many countries agreeing that we have to generate 3 times more renewable energy and 2 times more energy efficiency. In this part of the world, in Asia, we have been, of course, much more developing this moment in the industrialization perspective. And of course, the balance between what we can do in a more competitive production manufacturing, but as well more sustainable for the future is very important. And I see Singapore has been driving in the Southeast Asia this topic as a leader, as a government driving these aspects. And this is really affecting or is really propagating the positive energy to the other countries in South Asia as well. We can see a lot of collaboration in these aspects and see companies as well talking each other, connecting each other, discussing different type of solutions and different type of ideas, as well as a lot of different type of pain points. So what I see, collaboration is extremely important. This is not a solution for one company. It's not a solution for one individual. It's a solution that we collectively has to work together as a government, as private sector, as an individual. Doesn't matter if it's net zero 2045 or 2050 or 2040, but the direction needs to be there. And whenever direction is clear, I better to walk in that direction. Otherwise, you're going to be lost. You're going to be alone.
And that was Mr. Yoon Young Kim of Schneider Electric. He is their cluster president for Singapore and Brunei.
Which of these regular activities has the biggest carbon footprint? Using your phone 5 hours a day for a week, driving your car 20 minutes to work for 5 days a week, 10-minute hot shower every day for a week, or getting your lovely bunch of flowers from overseas. Do you do all of these things, Li-Ling, before you answer?
Well, I don't really drive. So, yeah, that one I don't have to feel guilty about. But the rest I do, yes. I do shower and I do use my phone and I do occasionally purchase flowers. I'm kind of torn between the imported flowers and the car driving. I think the flowers will be the one with the biggest carbon footprint because of the plane and the fuel and the transportation and all that, and then having to probably keep them in some temperature-controlled container, before they're actually put on the shelves. So I'm going to go with that for number 1. Number 2, driving the car, because we're burning fossil fuels and transportation is a major contributor to global warming. And then I'm going to go with shower and then using the phone.
Okay, you've been doing your homework on carbon emissions and you knew that I snuck that flower option for a reason.
It was so random, it had to be.
It was. Incredible amount of emissions, 32 kilograms of carbon emissions for a bunch of flowers. If you bought 4 bunches, you might as well take an hour-long international flight. Just incredible, the amount of emissions. Wow. So next time, buy local flowers. That's the secret. The second worst was the shower. That's about 14 kilograms of emissions, which is more than double the next worst option, which is using your phone for 5 hours a day. It's about 6 kilograms. And the best option was driving your car.
Really?
Surprisingly.
Wow.
20 minutes to work 5 days a week, 5.6 kilograms. Of course, you could take that all the way down to 0 if you walk or took a bicycle.
Yes. In this weather, yes.
All right, that's it for Climate Conversations this week. We hope you've enjoyed our chat. If you have ideas for a future episode, please do let us know.
Thank you, Jack, and everyone listening in. You can subscribe or give us a star rating on the platform you're using. It would be lovely if you do. Until then, I am Liling Tan.
And I'm Jack Board. Catch you next week.
Bye-bye.